Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Thank you for tuning in today. Obviously, a lot going on. 7 days left down in Austin, at least during this session. And to find out what all is happening, the deals that are being done and the deadlines that are coming up and have already passed, we visit with our friend Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report. Scott, 7 days left.
Not that I'm counting or anything.
No, you've got the counter right there. I see it on your website, quorumreport.com.
Yes,
There's a counter. You are counting.
In fact, toward the end of the legislative session, the countdown, if I can say this, sponsored by Texas Realtors, is the most popular thing at quorumreport.com. But as you can tell, because we have a sponsor, even though that's free on the front of the site, we're still ruthless capitalists.
That's right.
We're being paid.
That's right. Absolutely.
We're gonna get that money somehow.
Scott, with 7 days left, what does that mean? What does that mean for legislation? What does that mean for deadlines? What does it mean moving forward for our Texas lawmakers?
I'll run through the deadlines that are, sort of a little confusing, but I'll explain. So tomorrow, Tuesday, is the last day for the House to consider second reading on Senate bills and Senate joint resolutions. Then you get to Wednesday. That's the last day for the House to consider local and consent bills on second and third reading. Flash forward to Friday. That's the last day for the House to act on any changes that have been made by the Senate. Then you go to Saturday before midnight. The House copies of all of those concurrent resolutions have to be distributed. You get to the 139th day of the legislative session, which will be Sunday. That's the last day for the House to adopt those CCRs or discharge House conferees. And the 140th day, on that next Monday, is the last day that they can do anything, and those are just corrections only in the House and Senate. And that's usually when they have already struck the gavel and hit the old sign-y-die button. Now, all of that means that there is a little bit of transparency before the end of the legislative session. It used to be that those deadlines were not there. You don't have to know what all that means to know that if you have no deadlines, what would happen years ago is they would just pass a whole bunch of things on the last couple of days, and in fact, a lot of times on the very last day of the session. And there's a sort of a classic story about the Senate trying to pass an ethics bill. And by the way, Chad, there are two kinds of bills that politicians, they read every line of, and those are redistricting bills and ethics bills. And that's because those are the bills about them.
Right.
Those are the bills about, how they do their job. This ethics bill was up for debate, and basically the classic story was you had a senator holding up what might as well have been the phone book because nobody had read whatever it was. We've got to pass this thing. This is major ethics reform. And, then they passed the thing, and most of it was written later.
Wow, nice.
Yeah, so they don't do that anymore.
They don't do that anymore.
It was Speaker Pete Laney a couple of speakers ago who put these deadlines in place in the Texas House so that you could see, instead of having this mad dash, rush toward the very end of the legislative session on the last 24 or 48 hours, that you'd actually have about 3 weeks when certain things actually had to happen before they could actually become Texas law.
Yeah, it still seems like a mad dash, though,
it absolutely is.
At different times. Let's talk about the House Calendars Committee and a piece of legislation that I believe you and I talked about late last week, and that was SB 9, dealing with how elections are done here in Texas. It appears, according to social media, that is dead, but it may come back, maybe.
Well, and that's the thing is, just like Lazarus, these things can be revived, and you have to look for another bill that would be similar. It has to be that it would also maybe be a bill that deals with elections or voting, where some of these provisions could be added or the entire bill could be added. So you watch for that sort of stuff toward the end of the legislative session. They call them legislative vehicles. Can this language take a ride on that vehicle? That will happen in the House or Senate oftentimes. But Senate Bill 9 was assailed by Democrats, as you know, as voter suppression. Republicans, most Republicans say that it is just about securing the ballot box. We've heard these arguments many times before. Although with Senate Bill 9, it was such a sweeping thing, You did have some Republicans who were in dissent about this. Interesting that when this bill was in the Texas Senate, when it was being heard in a committee, the Republican Party of Texas was on one side of the issue, and the largest county GOP in the state, the Harris County GOP, where Houston is, they were on the other side of the issue. And that had to do with the part of it that is about paper ballots. The Republican Party of the state wants more of a paper trail. And the Harris County, those Houston Republicans don't want that, as I understand it, mainly because it takes so long to tabulate votes in Houston anyway on election nights. There's always jokes on social media about how long Houston is taking.
Yeah.
And so they were divided about that. I think that might have a little bit to do with why this thing ended up, sort of the trade bait, if you will, at the end with, as I understand it, House Republican leadership was telling Democrats that if they would go along with some other things than this quote-unquote voter suppression bill, would die a quiet death. Of course, there really are no quiet deaths anymore because of social media. People start tweeting out and Facebooking everything. There are celebrations about this bill is dead or that bill is dead. But for those opponents of it, and for those who support it, it's worth continuing to watch all the way to the end of the session to see if any of that language makes its way into some other bill.
Yeah. So today, I think it's today, the Texas House will be looking at SB 29. Correct? This dealing with taxpayer-funded lobbyists. Yeah,
there are a lot of folks, especially a lot of conservatives, who are upset about this quote-unquote taxpayer-funded lobbying that goes on in Austin. Of course, we're talking about when governments hire lobbyists to represent their interests before the legislature. There was a sort of broad bill that had been initially proposed that said that all taxpayer-funded lobbying would go away. This is not that, and it's important to understand that this is sort of, as some Republicans said it to me, this is a watered-down version of this, and so a lot of Republicans are wondering if doing this is worth, if the juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak. What this one does now, as it will be amended on the floor, it basically just says that cities and counties, nothing to do with school districts, which, of course, the ISDs have been the issue that's been critical, on a lot of these bills, right, when it came to the rollback rate elections, et cetera.
Yeah.
And the ISDs are not in this now. It's only cities and counties would be prohibited from hiring lobbyists on the following issues: on taxation, including the implementation, rates, and administration of taxes, and also bond elections, tax-supported debt, ethics, and transparency of public servants. So there are a lot of other issues that cities and counties deal with at the legislature. One of the questions that I've been asked is, well, if they're banned from doing that, then what's next? Does that mean that cities and counties also, in the future won't be able to hire attorneys when they get sued, et cetera? Maybe they would put all that power in the Attorney General's office. Who knows? But I'm told that there are quite a few Democrats who are going to vote for this because of a couple of things. One, that it has been quote-unquote watered down significantly, and because there are some other bills that have now been declared dead in the legislative process. One of the ones we just mentioned, which was SB 9, dealing with restrictions on voting. But some of the other bills that have gone into the wastebasket overnight, while some folks were watching other things like Game of Thrones. As fast as they kill people on Game of Thrones, some of these bills get killed at the legislature. And by the way, I think Senate staffers last night were glad that the Senate adjourned sort of early last night. It was a working Sunday here in Austin. A lot of those staffers got to go home and watch Game of Thrones. But some of the other bills that went in the trash were the bill about protecting Confederate monuments. And also the bill that we talked about here on the show on KFYO over the last couple of months, this idea of banning the government-mandated paid sick leave. Those bills also went in the trash on Sunday night.
Wow, that's two pretty big pieces of legislation actually that got trashed. Okay, so with this, the I guess as you mentioned, the watered down version of SB 29, taxpayer funded. So cities and counties will still be able to hire lobbyists, just not to lobby on tax issues, basically.
Mainly, on the tax issues, and something we were just writing about at quorumreport.com. If people want to check it out, this also puts the governor and his allies on the issue in better position if they want to take this issue up again of a sales tax increase in the next legislative session, because the cities and counties were in the mix on that. Of course, the cities and counties rely primarily on property taxes and sales taxes, and so they were against the tax swap, as were a lot of Democrats and Republicans. Of course, it's been in the Republican Party platform in this state for about 20 years that we should move toward more consumption taxes to get away from property taxes. And if the governor was to put his shoulder into that over the next 2 years and really work it, because as you talked about here on the show, it seemed like the PR of this was really managed badly by the governor, lieutenant governor, and the speaker, rolling it out in the middle of a session and not really doing the spade work, if you will, to try to garner support for this thing. I think the listeners at KFYO not impressed with this proposal, and I think that was borne out across the state, a big part of why the tax swap flopped, if you will. And so I think if the governor was to work on it over the next 2 years, he could garner, enough support among Republican members to move in that direction. And I think if it was part of the initial calculation when the budget is put together, in a couple of years, then maybe those numbers would look better than they looked when it was sort of done kind of slapdash fashion, in the middle of a legislative session, where the Legislative Budget Board numbers made it look like if you were making any less than about $150,000 a year, then you were not going to benefit from this thing. I think they could make the numbers look better. Like they could be maybe more if you're making $55,000 or $60,000 a year, you could start to benefit from this. But that, of course, would be in the offing, and the governor would really have to put his political capital behind it and perhaps impose some discipline on the issue during the March primaries, which would put him at odds, of course, with some of the big third-party conservative groups like Empower Texans, which, of course, came out strong against that proposal in this legislative session. So there's a lot that could unfold, but I think, for the bottom line on this, one of the strongest voices, or some of the strongest voices that were against that very unpopular proposal, it looks like they may be silenced if this taxpayer lobbying ban actually passes this watered-down version.
Where did it get watered down? Did it get watered down in the Senate, or will it be watered down in the House?
Looks like the watering down, if you will, is happening in the House. I was told over the weekend, and we posted this at QR yesterday, that and we have the amendment now, that the language that's going to be proposed on the floor by the House sponsor of this, a guy named Mace Middleton from the Galveston area. The effort was made to narrow this thing, if you will, as the House leadership tries to garner Democratic support for it while apparently cutting some of these deals on these other big pieces of legislation, which were important to conservatives.
Scott, before we get into some of the other pieces of legislation, a texter asking what happened with daylight saving time. Did they vote to get away with it? What happened on that?
Well, what did I'm going to have to check that actually,
because I know they had said that they wanted to allow people to vote on it.
Right. I'm going to have to look that up. I'm trying to remember where that happened in the mix.
I can't remember if they came to an agreement and if it's on its way to the governor's desk or not.
There's too many things going on here. Let me check on it. I'll text you and you can announce it.
All right, that'll work. Let's see. Another piece of legislation today that was dead. It's come back to life. It's the supporters say it's about religious liberty. It's been nicknamed the Save Chick-fil-A bill.
Yes, the Save Chick-fil-A bill, which, as you know, if this doesn't pass, all the Chick-fil-A franchises across the state are under threat of closure.
Oh, no.
You know what this is about. In San Antonio, of course, the city council said that Chick-fil-A could not operate in their airport, which, in and of itself is a political statement. I mean, the city council there was saying that they don't agree with what they consider Chick-fil-A's anti-LGBT stance because of some of the groups it's been affiliated with, including the Fellowship of Christian Athletes and some others, and because of the policy positions of the founder of the company, who is, of course, not with us anymore. But look, the LGBTQ caucus is going to fight this hard on the Texas House floor today, I'm told. They did kill the House version of this, in the last couple of weeks, but it was revived in the Texas Senate. And the argument that I heard from Senator Brian Hughes, who was carrying this in the Senate, it's a compelling argument. He's saying that, look, no government should be able to discriminate against anybody because of their associations with any religious group. But at the same time, Democrats were asking, well, why is it we're going to bat for folks who may be associated with various religious groups, or we don't go to bat for minorities who may be discriminated against those folks? It'll be a heated argument. I would expect it to go on at least for a few hours today on the House floor.
Yeah. Scott, let's see, what else do we need to know about what's happening down in Austin?
I think the final thing, and it's what we started with, is that as those deadlines start to go by, is that anything and everything can happen. And as I've been reminding people, ain't nothing actually dead until sine die, when that last gavel hits. So we'll have gavel-to-gavel coverage for you at quorumreport.com. You can sign up for our free emails there at quorumreport.com.
Oh, before I let you go, I know they're still working on, the budget was released. They're going to vote on that, SB2 and HB3. We got school finance and we got property tax reform. Are you hearing of any changes that are going to be made? Anything shocking as far as changes go before they get those voted out into the governor's desk?
Doesn't sound like any shocking news is coming on any of those. I think what the big question mark is what is the raise for teachers in public schools in Texas going to be? Remember, the lieutenant governor had promised $5,000 raises across the board for teachers all across the state. The House leadership wanted to do something a little bit more modest, but also bring in other employees at the independent school districts. I was told last night that the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor met for about an hour trying to hash that out specifically. Their offices haven't commented yet, but I would stay tuned on that. I think that's the big sticking point right now, and of course that does have some implications for exactly what is in the budget. But as far as HB1, SB2, which is the rollback rates, and HB3, which is the school finance bill, I think the negotiators are pretty close on all that. And, of course, congratulations to the folks up in West Texas because we did get the news that, according to Chairman Burrows, that the money will be there for that vet school.
Yeah, and it looks like they also adopted the House rider, which was much better for the Texas Tech vet school than the Senate rider, which the Senate rider had said that all this was contingent on the the higher board of education signing off on this. The House, not so much.
Yeah, the House would rather just handle that, as legislators, and at the end of the day, it's usually a pretty easy argument to make to politicians that they ought to have the final say on something.
Yeah, that's true.
Rather than hand it to somebody else.
Yeah, absolutely. Scott, tell folks what they can find on Quorum Report.
We've got it all covered for you there, quorumreport.com. We just posted the analysis about all of the deal-making that's going on right here at the end of the legislative session. You can follow us on Twitter at Quorum Report, and just check out the website at quorumreport.com.
All right. Scott, as always, appreciate it. We'll visit with you next time.
Thank you much, Chad. Talk soon.
Thank you. That's Scott Braddock, editor, Quorum Report.